Behind an ancestral temple in Maoping, Jingangshan, stands a building. Because of its octagonal skylight, it's known as the Octagonal Building. It was here, almost a century ago, under the flickering light of an oil lamp, that Mao Zedong penned two seminal works. Why is it that red political power can exist in China? And The Struggle in the Jingang Mountains. Two brilliant articulations of the theory of the armed independent regime of workers and peasants that would illuminate the future course of the Chinese Revolution. On February 2, 2016, General Secretary of the CPC, Xi Jinping, presented flower baskets to the Revolutionary Martyrs Cemetery in Jingangshan.
井冈山这块土地啊，每一次来我都是接受洗礼，升华精神。一个伟大的理想信念，它一定要有扎实的理论基础。井冈山的道路是马克思主义本土化，生死而成功。
In July 1922, the CPC went back to Shanghai for its second National Congress. The important practical decisions made at the meeting were shaped by the conclusion of the analysis of China's existing social, political, and economic conditions presented to Congress, that China remained a semi-feudal and semi-colonial country. So while reaffirming its ultimate commitment to the realization of socialism and communism, the party's immediate goals were to overthrow the warlords, defeat international imperialism, and unify China as a true democratic republic. The Congress also approved the first constitution of the Communist Party of China. Because of the nearby silk reeling plants, during the 1920s, Qinjia Road and Chengdu North Road housed Shanghai's largest concentration of industrial workers. From the very beginning, the CPC had emphasized the central role to be played by organized labor in the struggle. So in August 1921, to coordinate its activities in this arena, it had formed the China Labor Association Office. It was an initiative that soon bore fruit. Between January 1922, when the Hong Kong seamen went on strike, and February 1923, when the Beijing Hankou railway workers downed tools, the Chinese working class, led by the party, began to flex its muscles. In autumn 1921, Mao Zedong, Li Lisan, and Liu Shaoqi spent a year in Anyuan coal mine. They had come to investigate the miserable living conditions endured by the workers there and to agitate for industrial action at the grassroots. Their mission was a success. When the workers came out on strike, they were supported by all sections of society. The Beijing Hankou railway workers' strike, however, ended much less happily. Brutally suppressed by the warlords, it was an episode that culminated in the martyrdom of a number of early CPC members. In the aftermath of this bloody disaster, for a while, activism in the national labor movement subsided. For the young CPC, it was a harsh lesson. The party was still a long way from being strong enough to take on the forces of imperialism and feudalism. To do that, a broad united front would be necessary. Sun Yat-sen, then premier of the Kuomintang, saw the political potential of a CPC-led national labor movement. Recognizing the CPC as a vibrant revolutionary force, he decided to cooperate with the party. These images show a group of CPC members participating in communist international conferences in Moscow between the years 1922 and 1924. It was with the assistance of the Comintern that the CPC began to establish a united front. For its third National Congress, the CPC delegates headed south to Guangzhou. Determined to find a way of cooperating with Sun Yat-sen's Kuomintang, this Congress ruled that individual members of the CPC could also belong to the KMT. But one thing was clear: however close their partnership with the KMT, the CPC would retain its political, ideological and organizational independence. In January 1924, Sun Yat-sen chaired the KMT's first National Congress, also in Guangzhou. At this pivotal meeting, the Kuomintang adopted three revolutionary policies: to side with Soviet Russia, to unite its efforts with the CPC, and to support the workers and peasants. The first united front was now a reality. In July 1926, the KMT's National Revolutionary Army began its northern expedition to break the power of the warlords. It was a campaign in which CPC members like Ye Ting, who led his independent regiment into Wuchang and earned it the moniker of Iron Army, played a conspicuous and exemplary role. As the northern expedition was getting into full swing, the peasant movements of Hunan, Hubei and Jiangxi were gathering momentum. What to make of these peasant fighters? Were they little more than bandits who had been crushed as reactionary elements in the KMT and some CPC right opportunists maintained? Or were they potential revolutionary allies? It was a question that urgently needed an answer. So early in 1927, Mao Zedong went to Hunan to see for himself. The result of his 32-day field trip was his report on an investigation of the peasant movement in Hunan. The anti-peasant position, Mao reported, was wrong. The peasants had to be mobilized and transformed into a vanguard of revolution. But there was another, more immediate danger looming on the horizon for the revolution. By this point, Chiang Kai-shek had risen to power and, aided and abetted by the imperialist powers, was beginning to target communists. Just as the situation reached a critical juncture, key CPC leaders compromised and conceded ground. It turned to be a fatal mistake. On April 12, 1927, Chiang struck. In the counter-revolutionary coup that followed in Shanghai, many communists and revolutionaries were arrested and executed. A bitterer blow came on July the 15th when Wang Jingwei, a key figure of the KMT government, formally broke with the CPC. As CPC members were liquidated, the first united front came to a bloody end. The nationalist revolution of China failed. Li Dajiao, a founding father of the CPC, was one of the many who lost their lives. He was hanged by the warlord Jiang Zuolin on April 28, 1927. While in prison awaiting execution, Li remained defiant. As a young student, I began the fight for national liberation. I've stuck to my beliefs. Time will tell. Equally brave and defiant was Chun Yanyan, then Secretary of Jiangsu Provincial Party Committee. Staring death in the face at Longhua Execution Ground, Shanghai, he refused to kneel as ordered by the executioner, literally standing his ground until the very last moment. Less than a year later, his younger brother Chun Qiaonian, also a Jiangsu Provincial Party Committee member, joined his brother in martyrdom, dying bravely in Shanghai, aged a mere 26. Nor did this brutal campaign spare the CPC's female comrades, with Xiang Jingyu, for example, bravely facing torture and execution in Wuhan. On the way to the execution ground, it's said the executioner filled her mouth with stones and gagged her face with a belt. In the aftermath of her death, her husband Tsai He's son wrote, "Great Jingyu, heroic Jingyu, you didn't die. You'll never die. You're not just my beloved. You're the eternal beloved of the Chinese proletariat." But even as this white terror spread across the country, the CPC remained unbowed. As Mao Zedong later remarked, "But the Communist Party of China and the Chinese people were neither cowed nor conquered nor exterminated. They picked themselves up, wiped off the blood, buried their fallen comrades, and went into battle again." In fact, it was a time of trial that brought forth many true heroes. Despite the danger, Ye Jianying, He Long, Peng Dehuai, Shu Teli, and other resolute revolutionaries put caution to one side and joined the CPC. The workers and peasants, meanwhile, regrouped and prepared to fight another day. The fight back began in the small hours of August 1st, 1927. That morning, led by the CPC, 20,000 soldiers rose up. The first shots of armed resistance to the KMT reactionaries in Nanchang had been fired. The Nanchang uprising, born of the CPC's determination to resist the KMT's extermination campaign, marked a significant turning point in CPC history, the beginning of its independent military capability that would soon lead to the establishment of a people's army and the party's rise to national power. Six days after the Nanchang uprising began, the CPC Central Committee secretly convened in number 41 Sanjiao Street in Hankou. This has gone down in history as the August 7th meeting. This emergency meeting confirmed the reasons for the failure of the nationalist revolution and determined the general policy of agrarian reform and armed resistance to the KMT. As such, it gave new hope and inspiration to a dispirited and disoriented CPC. Mao Zedong was one party figure who laid particular stress on the need for continued military action. "Political power," he memorably observed, "grows out of the barrel of a gun." It was in the wake of the August 7th meeting that Chu Qiubai, key CPC Central Committee member, came up with the idea of sending Mao to work in Shanghai. The young Mao, however, felt that grassroots activism would serve the needs of the revolution better than working in the city. So Mao departed to the border area between Hunan and Jiangxi to lead the autumn harvest uprising. Before the uprising, Mao took his wife Yang Kaihui back to her hometown Banzang in Hunan. He would never see her again. In October 1930, Yang was arrested and interrogated about Mao's whereabouts. When commanded to publicly renounce her marriage, she resolutely refused. Death was preferable to betrayal of her husband and the revolutionary cause. On November 14th, she was executed outside Liaoyang Gate, Changsha. Yang, aged just 29, had paid the ultimate price. On September 9, 1927, in response to the CPC Hunan Provincial Committee's order to seize Changsha, the autumn harvest uprising began. Advancing in 3 columns, the troops advanced on Changsha, but losses were high, especially in Pingjiang and Liaoyang. Of the 5,000 who'd started, only 1,500 survived the initial advance. Mao Zedong broke off the attack and fell back into the mountains. But far from being a defeat, this withdrawal into countryside would prove a turning point for the Chinese Revolution. Mao's army stayed in Sanwan village, Jiangxi, for 5 days. During this time, the army reorganized. 2 reforms were of especial importance: party branches at company level and rank-and-file committees to ensure democracy and political equality. The firm establishment of party authority over the army marked an important step in the creation of a new people's army led by the proletariat. With the army fully reorganized, Mao marched on Ziping town in Jingangshan area on October 27, 1927, aiming to establish strongholds in the mountains. The struggle for the revolutionary base areas had begun. In addition to the autumn harvest uprising, more than 100 armed uprisings took place during this period. Nanchang, Guangzhou, the Haifeng-Lufeng area, Huangma, southern Hunan, Baise all saw disturbances of some kind. Young CPC members Zhou Wenyong, Chen Tiejun, Wu Deming, Zhang Tailei, Yun Daiying, and Peng Pai all died bravely before they'd even bid their families farewell.
I think 爷爷彭湃呢，他是一个对信仰非常坚守的革命者。面对死亡的时候，他说：“不久的将来，一定会建立全国的侍卫哀。到那个时候，我们中国人民就可以过上幸福的生活。”他的目光是穿透黑暗，看到曙光的。
But costly though the uprisings were, they sowed the seeds for future revolutionary success. In April 1928, Zhu De and Chen Yi led the remaining Nanchang uprising troops and southern Hunan uprising peasant forces to the Jingangshan area. By late April, they joined forces with Mao's troops in Lungshi, Ning'an County. The successful link-up of Zhu's and Mao's forces created the 4th Workers' and Peasants' Revolutionary Army, later to be known as the Workers' and Peasants' Red Army. This Red Army soon proved its worth in battle, smashing through the KMT's repeated attempts to encirclement and winning the battles of Wu Doujiang, Langyuankou, and Huangyangjie.
军事影响大，国民党的一个来这个，我没有在这个新切切的、老切切的把国民党3个团打垮，这在全国的横军里面啊，当时最有战斗力的，影响最大的。
In the midst of the intense fighting, political developments continued. Between April and May 1928, while Mao and Zhu struggled on in Jingangshan, Chu Qiubai, Zhou Enlai, and over 100 other representatives secretly left China. They were bound for Moscow, host city of the 6th National Congress of the CPC, held in June and July that year, the only CPC Congress ever held outside China. It was a Congress that marked a shift in the emphasis of the party's revolutionary efforts. From then on, more attention would be paid to long-term efforts to win over the broad masses than to uprisings. With this in mind, towards the end of 1928, the Jingangshan revolutionary base promulgated the Jingangshan land law, distributing land to all the poor peasants. Convinced that the Red Army was fighting for their interests, more and more peasants committed themselves to the communist cause. However, militarily, the situation at the encircled Jingangshan looked dire. So on January 14, 1929, Mao and Zhu broke through the KMT lines and advanced towards southern Jiangxi, hotly pursued by KMT regiments and constantly harassed by reactionary militia groups. As Mao later noted in his report to the Central Committee, the Jingangshan breakout was one of the most perilous undertakings ever attempted by the Red Army. Meanwhile, problems soon became apparent among the soldiers as well as leadership of the 4th Red Army. Two unhealthy tendencies made themselves felt: overemphasis on purely military concerns and a short-sighted tactical approach. This caused a fierce debate about the fundamental principle upon which the Red Army and its relationship with the party was founded.
那时候真的呢，枪指挥党啊，是党指挥枪。他就说是这个应该绝对啊，党应该绝对的领导军队是党，这是党的军队啊。他说我一定要坚持。
On December 28, 1929, something unusual happened in Gutien in subtropical Fujian, a heavy snowfall. It was against this backdrop that the 9th Party Congress of the Workers' and Peasants' Red Army took place, an event that would go down in history as the famous Gutien Congress that placed party and army building on a firm ideological footing and reaffirmed absolute party control over the People's Army. It was a milestone in the history of the party and its army. It was soon after the Gutien Congress that Mao wrote to Lin Biao. Addressing the spirit of pessimism that had led some to ask, how long will the red flag be flying? Mao wrote, an old Chinese saying applies here: a single spark can start a prairie fire. By the end of the letter, his language would become even more evocative, pertaining to the future of the revolution. He wrote, "It is like a ship far out at sea, whose masthead can already be seen above the shore. It is like the morning sun in the east, whose shimmering rays are visible from a high mountain top. It is like a child about to be born, moving restlessly in its mother's womb." Beginning in October 1930, the KMT army launched large-scale encirclement and eradication operations against the Central Revolutionary Base. But after beating back 3 offensives, the Red Army consolidated its position by connecting up the bases in southern Jiangxi and western Fujian. The result was a huge unified Central Revolutionary Base covering 20 counties. Likewise, consolidated base areas with a total population of millions existed in Hubei, Henan, Anhui, and western Hunan and Hubei. Together, these base areas burned like red flames in the very heart of KMT rule, spreading south and north, growing in strength and power. In November 1931, a provisional central government for the Chinese Soviet Republic was established in Ruijin, Jiangxi. This was the first National Workers' and Peasants' Democratic Government in Chinese history, provided the CPC with its first experience of governance. It was a move that strengthened the development of the revolutionary bases, enhanced the influence of the party and the Red regime, and created a new theatre for the agrarian revolutionary war. At a critical moment for the revolution, therefore, the Chinese communists, represented by Mao Zedong, were able to apply the universal truths of Marxism to the concrete practical needs of the Chinese Revolution. It was this synthesis that enabled Mao to discover a revolutionary road, encircle the cities from the rural areas, then seize nationwide power with armed force. The spirit of Jingangshan and that of the Soviet area, formed during the exploration of this road, are timeless, carrying as they do the original aspirations and missions of the CPC. They continue to foster the CPC's great revolutionary spirit to this very day.
从长夜到日出，走过千山万水的路，每一步都是信仰足迹，烙印下新中国版图，从贫弱到富强，走出复兴，为业征途，每一天都有奋斗牺牲，只为人民拥抱幸福，凭着心中坚定信念，干叫日月换新天，雄关漫道，风雨无阻，汇聚起中华儿女同向前。从贫弱到富强，走出复兴，为业征途，每一天都有奋斗牺牲。